Hey there, fellow deep divers. Ever catch yourself thinking, I'm so glad I'm not like that, you know? Those people who make bad choices or can't seem to get their act together.
Yeah.
Today's deep dive is going to challenge that comfy little thought bubble. We've got some fascinating excerpts from psychology textbooks tackling self-serving bias, the ups and downs of intuition, and the surprising ways seemingly nice people can end up making not so nice decisions.
Yeah, what's really fascinating is we often think we're in the driver's seat of our lives, making rational choices based on our values.
Isn't it?
These sources reveal the hidden forces, both internal and external, that can steer us in some unexpected directions.
Okay, so let's start with self-serving bias. I think we all know someone who always blames external factors when things go wrong. It wasn't me, it was the traffic, the weather, the other guy.
Right.
But are we any better?
Probably not. Self-serving bias is so deeply ingrained in us. It's like an evolutionary hangover. Think about it for our ancestors. Having a positive self-image probably helped them attract mates, secure resources, survive. The problem is this tendency to see ourselves favorably, even when evidence suggests otherwise, can really trip us up today.
So it's not just about dodging blame. The excerpts also mention marital spats, unhappy workers, and even stalled negotiations, all because of self-serving explanations. How does that even work?
Well, imagine a couple arguing. Each person truly believes they're putting in more effort, being more understanding, basically being the better partner at work. We tend to overestimate our contributions and underestimate our colleagues, same in negotiations. We think our offer is super reasonable, while the other side seems downright unreasonable.
That's scary because it means we can't even see how biased we're being. The sources pointed out how we tend to think we're more ethical, more competent, smarter, basically better than the average person. How can we be so blind to our own shortcomings?
It's the ultimate blind spot, and it prevents us from learning from our mistakes and growing as individuals. One thing you can try is, next time something goes wrong, pause before pointing fingers. Ask yourself, what role did I play in this? Even if it's just a tiny part, owning it can make a big difference.
That's a great challenge for our listeners. Now, the sources also talk about unrealistic optimism. I'm a pretty optimistic person, but is there such a thing as too much optimism?
There can be. A healthy dose of optimism is great. It keeps us motivated and resilient. But unrealistic optimism can be like driving with your eyes closed. You're so convinced everything will work out that you don't bother with things like seatbelts or,
Yeah.
looking at the road. The textbook used the example of people who think they're immune to things like accidents or illnesses
Yeah.
and end up not taking precautions.
Okay, that makes sense. So how do we find that sweet spot between optimism and argo while not being totally naive?
That's where defensive pessimism comes in, which sounds kind of gloomy, but it's actually pretty useful. Think of it like this. Imagine you're prepping for a big presentation. A defensive pessimist might mentally rehearse all the ways it could go wrong, tech failures, tough questions from the audience, even tripping on the way to the stage.
That sounds stressful.
It can be, but it can also be incredibly motivating. By anticipating potential problems, you're more likely to prepare thoroughly and actually perform better.
So it's like you're tricking yourself into being more prepared. I can see how that would be helpful, especially for people who tend to be overly optimistic. But let's be honest, sometimes we just have to go with our gut right.
Absolutely. Intuition is a powerful tool. It's what the source refers to as System 1 thinking. Imagine you're driving home from work. You're not consciously thinking about every turn and stop sign. That's System 1 at work. It's fast, efficient, and great for routine tasks.
So it's like our brain's autopilot.
Exactly.
Hmm.
But like autopilot, it can sometimes miss important details or take shortcuts that lead to errors. This is where System 2 comes in, that slower, more deliberate type of thinking we use for complex decisions.
So when is intuition reliable? And when should we hit the brakes and switch to System 2?
That's the million-dollar question. Intuition is often spot on for things we've done 1,000 times, like riding a bike or reading people's facial expressions. But when we're dealing with something new or complex, our gut can lead us astray.
The source material had some interesting examples of how intuition can go wrong, like perceptual misinterpretations and constructed beliefs. It's kind of freaky to think our minds can create illusions we perceive as reality.
It is. One classic example is the overconfidence bias. We tend to overestimate the accuracy of our own judgments, especially when the consequences are far off in the future. Think about how confident we feel predicting the winner of a sports game before it happens, compared to how often those predictions actually turn out to be right.
Yeah, I'm definitely guilty of that. So how do we avoid these intuition pitfalls?
One strategy is to be aware of the situations where intuition is more likely to be unreliable. Anything involving high stakes, unfamiliar territory, or strong emotions. In those cases, slow down, engage system 2, and consider alternative perspectives.
Okay, so we've talked about how our own minds can trick us, but what about external influences? The third source we have dives into the power of conformity, and it's a little unsettling to say the least.
It is. This source uses the Milgram obedience study as a prime example of how easily we can be swayed by social pressure, even when it goes against our own values.
For those who haven't heard of it, can you give us a quick rundown of the Milgram experiment?
Essentially, participants were told they were taking part in a study about learning and memory. They were instructed to deliver electric shocks to another person, the learner. Whenever they got an answer wrong, the shocks increased in intensity with each wrong answer. Now here's the catch. The learner was an actor pretending to be in pain. The real focus was on how far the participants would go, simply because an authority figure told them to.
So the participants believed they were actually inflicting pain on another person. That must have been incredibly stressful.
Absolutely. And the results were shocking. A majority of the participants continued to deliver shocks, even when the learner was screaming in agony, just because the experimenter in a lab coat told them to continue.
Wow, that is disturbing. What does this tell us about human nature?
It reveals how powerful situational forces can be. We're wired to follow authority figures, even when it conflicts with our own moral compass. This study also highlighted a few factors that increase obedience, like the emotional distance from the victim, the perceived legitimacy of the authority figure, and the gradual escalation of requests, that slippery slope that makes it harder to say no once you've already said yes a few times.
So even if we think we're strong-willed, independent thinkers, we might be more susceptible to these pressures than we realize.
Exactly. And that's why understanding these dynamics is so crucial. It allows us to recognize these forces at play and make more conscious choices. We'll delve deeper into the implications of this in the next part of our deep dive. It's easy to sit back and judge those Milgram participants thinking, I would never do that. But the study's power lies in revealing how situational factors can sometimes override our deeply held beliefs.
Yeah, it really makes you question how much control we have over our actions when the pressure is on. The source material also mentions this idea of a slippery slope when it comes to escalating requests.
That's a crucial element of how we can be manipulated without even realizing it. We might agree to a small request, something seemingly harmless, and then find ourselves inching further down a path we never intended to take. Each step justifies the next until we're miles away from our original principles.
Like those free trial offers that end up costing you a fortune.
Exactly. Or think about how dictators rise to power. It rarely happens overnight. They start by chipping away at freedoms, introducing seemingly reasonable measures that people accept, until one day the whole system has changed.
So how do we protect ourselves from this kind of subtle influence? It feels like we're constantly bombarded with requests and pressures from all sides.
Awareness is the first line of defense. By understanding the psychological mechanisms at play, we can start to recognize those red flags and make more conscious choices.
So it's about being more mindful of the situation, identifying those moments where we might be vulnerable to manipulation, and having the courage to say no when something feels off.
Absolutely. It takes practice, and it's not always easy, especially when we're worried about upsetting others or rocking the boat. But the source material really emphasizes that living in alignment with our values sometimes requires us to take a stand, even if it's uncomfortable.
That's a powerful message. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking, well, everyone else is doing it, so it must be okay. But this really highlights the importance of individual responsibility and moral courage.
Exactly. And it brings us back to that idea we touched on earlier, that even seemingly nice people can be corrupted by powerful situations. The Milgram study demonstrates that it's not about inherent goodness or badness, but about the extraordinary influence our environment can have on our behavior.
That's a pretty sobering thought. It's almost like our personalities and values are malleable, shaped by the forces around us.
There's definitely an element of that, but it's not a reason to despair. It just underscores the importance of being aware of those forces, both internal and external, that can shape our choices.
So we've talked a lot about external pressures, but let's circle back to the internal stuff. How do our own biases and perceptions play into all of this?
That's a great question. It's not just about external forces shaping our behavior. It's also about how we interpret those forces and how we view ourselves in relation to them. Remember that self-serving bias we talked about earlier?
Right, the tendency to take credit for successes and blame failures on outside factors.
Exactly. That bias can blind us to the ways in which our own actions might contribute to difficult situations,
Mm.
making us more likely to conform to external pressures to maintain a positive self-image.
So we might rationalize our compliance by saying, everyone else is doing it, or I was just following orders, even if deep down we know it's not right.
Precisely. It's a way of protecting our egos, even at the expense of our integrity. This is where the concept of cognitive dissonance comes into play.
Cognitive dissonance, that's the discomfort we feel when our actions don't align with our beliefs, right?
You got it. And when we engage in behavior that contradicts our values, we often experience this intense internal conflict. One way to resolve that dissonance is to adjust our beliefs to match our actions, essentially convincing ourselves that what we did wasn't so bad after all.
So we're essentially rewriting our own internal narratives to avoid feeling guilty or hypocritical.
It's a subtle process, often happening beneath the surface of our awareness. But it's a powerful mechanism that helps us maintain a sense of internal consistency, even if it means distorting reality.
This is making me think about how easily we can slip into denial or justify harmful behavior, even when we consider ourselves good people. It's like we're looking through a warped mirror, seeing what we want to see instead of facing the truth.
That's a great analogy. It highlights how our minds are constantly filtering information, shaping our perception of the world through our own biases, assumptions, and desires. This is why cultivating intellectual humility is so crucial.
Intellectual humility, what does that mean exactly?
It means acknowledging that we don't have all the answers, that we're fallible, that our perspectives are limited. It's about being open to new information, being willing to change our minds, and admitting when we're wrong.
So it's about embracing uncertainty and recognizing that we might not always have the full picture.
Exactly. When we cling too tightly to certainty, we close ourselves off to new possibilities and different ways of seeing the world. That can make us more vulnerable to manipulation and less likely to challenge potentially harmful norms.
It sounds counterintuitive, but embracing uncertainty could actually make us more resistant to those negative influences.
It's all about finding that balance between confidence and humility. We need enough confidence to act on our beliefs, but enough humility to question those beliefs and be open to change.
I love that idea. Embracing uncertainty. It's almost like an invitation to lifelong learning and growth.
And it brings us to another vital point from the source material: the importance of critical thinking. It's essential for navigating the complexities of the world and for resisting manipulation.
Right. Critical thinking isn't about being cynical or negative. It's about thinking for ourselves and not blindly accepting what we're told.
Exactly. It's about questioning assumptions, evaluating evidence, and considering multiple perspectives. It's a skill that can be developed with practice and applied to every aspect of our lives.
So listeners, start paying attention to how you think about things. Question your assumptions. Look for evidence. Be open to different viewpoints. And don't be afraid to challenge the status quo.
That's great advice. We've been diving deep into these fascinating psychological concepts, exploring how our minds work and how we can become more aware of the forces that shape our choices. But there's always more to uncover, and we'll continue our exploration in the next part of this deep dive. Welcome back, deep divers. We've been exploring how self-serving bias, intuition, and conformity can lead us down some pretty unexpected paths. But what really stuck with me from the source material was this idea that even seemingly nice people can get caught up in making not-so-nice decisions.
It's a sobering thought, isn't it? It challenges that comforting belief that bad things are only done by bad people. But the research suggests that it's often situational forces, those subtle pressures and slippery slopes, that can lead ordinary people to make choices they never thought they were capable of.
The Milgram experiment is a stark example, but the source material goes deeper, talking about how we construct moral rationalizations for immoral behavior. It's like our minds are masters at justifying things, even when we know deep down they're wrong. It's a fascinating paradox. We have this deep-seated need to see ourselves as good, moral people. So when we act in ways that contradict those beliefs, our minds scramble to find explanations, to bridge the gap between our actions and our self-image.
So we tell ourselves things like, I was just following orders, or everyone else was doing it, or it's for the greater good. These justifications can be incredibly powerful in silencing that inner voice that tells us something isn't right.
Absolutely. And this is where critical thinking becomes so crucial. It's not just about analyzing information. It's about applying that same scrutiny to our own beliefs and motivations. The source material encourages us to engage in what they call moral contemplation, taking time to reflect on our values, our actions, and the potential consequences of our choices.
It's like hitting the pause button in the middle of life's hustle
Mhm.
and asking ourselves, wait, am I on the right track here? Are my actions aligned with my values?
Exactly, and it's about being willing to have those uncomfortable conversations with ourselves, to question our assumptions and motivations, even when it's easier to just go along with the crowd.
The source material also emphasizes the importance of seeking out diverse perspectives, especially those that challenge our own. It's easy to get caught in an echo chamber of self-justification when we only surround ourselves with people who agree with us.
It's essential to expose ourselves to different viewpoints, even perhaps especially those that make us uncomfortable. That's how we stretch our thinking, broaden our understanding, and develop a more nuanced moral compass.
So to our listeners out there, we encourage you to keep exploring these ideas. Pay attention to your own thoughts and behaviors. Notice how your mind works in different situations. And don't be afraid to question everything, even your own deeply held beliefs.
The more we understand about ourselves, the better equipped we'll be to navigate the complexities of human interaction and resist those subtle forces that can lead us astray.
It's been a fascinating journey into the inner workings of our minds. We've explored our biases, the power of intuition, the surprising influence of social pressure, and the ways in which our minds can rationalize even our most questionable actions.
We hope you've gained some valuable insights. That will help you make more conscious and informed choices in your own life.
Remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand about ourselves and the world around us, the better equipped we are to live meaningful and authentic lives.
And with that, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the fascinating world of human behavior. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving.